Early evening settles over the heart of the city, the sun dipping just below the skyline to cast a final glow across the cluttered streets. Office workers spill out of tall buildings in waves, their footsteps rapid against the sidewalks as they race to beat rush hour traffic. Neon lights begin to flicker in and out along the avenue. A convenience store sign buzzes overhead while tired shopkeepers drag metal shutters down over darkening storefronts. The city is alive and yet curiously indifferent. Horns blare, pedestrians tighten their coats against a chill in the air, and almost no one looks twice at the man slouched on the curb beside a pile of blankets. He is a solitary figure in this hurried backdrop, an older black man whose jacket is fraying at the cuffs. Next to him rests a battered duffel bag, the fabric stained from night spent against the concrete. A battered cardboard sign leans against a nearby wall, its handwritten letters faded from wind and rain, though still legible enough to read something about needing a little help. At a quick glance, he could be any one of the hundreds of souls living rough, ignored by city dwellers, but there is a subtle sign of something more to him. Underneath his worn collar dangles the glint of metallic dog tags. He keeps them mostly hidden, as if they are a keepsake he can't bear to lose but doesn't want to advertise. Nearby, a couple in office attire sidesteps him without breaking stride. A delivery driver rushes past, balancing takeout bags, while a street musician's plaintive saxophone echoes a few blocks away. The man watches the day's last light fade across the tops of buildings with detached weariness. He cradles a small paper cup of coffee long since cooled like it's a lifeline. In a world bursting with motion, he is still. The raw honesty of his situation goes unnoticed by the crowd. Most of them were preoccupied with the next bus or the next place they need to be. And so, in this transitional hush between dusk and night, the stage is set, a man invisible to passersby, quietly clinging to dignity in a place that shows little compassion, unaware that, in just a matter of moments, his anonymity and his composure will be put to the test. From the way he shifts his shoulders against the cold, it's clear the man has grown used to discomfort, though not entirely resigned to it. He sets the empty coffee cup beside him and adjusts the frayed collar of his jacket. The movement reveals the metallic gleam of his dog tags for just an instant before he tucks them away again. If anyone cared to look closer, they might notice a quiet depth in his eyes, a watchfulness that stands out amidst the glazed expressions of those who've fallen on hard times. This is Alex Harris, a man who once served with distinction but now appears at the frayed edges of society. His face betrays fatigue, but he carries himself with an unspoken dignity at odds with his current plight. A fellow passerby, a grizzled man in a tattered baseball cap, pauses, recognition lighting his features. He offers Alex a respectful half salute, as if aware of the meaning behind those hidden tags, but says nothing more. Alex returns a faint nod, acknowledging the unspoken bond between them. In that small exchange lies a suggestion of his past years of discipline, battles fought in faraway lands, and loyalty that refused to die even when his life took a hard turn. Yet, in the bustle of the sidewalk, these hints remain unnoticed by the majority. To most, Alex is just another transient figure on the street corner, invisible until someone looks a little deeper. A block down the street, the low hum of tired engines and the shuffle of pedestrians is interrupted by louder than necessary laughter. 4 young men spill out of a convenience store, plastic bags rustling at their sides. They shove each other playfully, but there's an edge to their banter, mock insults, laced with aggression rather than camaraderie. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a perpetual smirk, looks around as though the city is his personal territory, daring someone to challenge him. His friends carry themselves with the same easy arrogance, their body language broadcasting that this night is still young, and they're on the hunt for a spark of excitement. They zigzag along the sidewalk, occasionally swinging their arms or thrusting out a foot at passing strangers, not full-on confrontations, but enough to unsettle anyone who catches the tail end of their hostility. A few pedestrians change course or pick up the pace, lowering their heads to avoid any reason for this pack to single them out. The group's laughter and curses resound like clanging metal, an invasive sound against the otherwise subdued rhythm of the evening. One of the young men spots Alex in the distance. He nudges his leader, nodding toward the lone figure sitting with his back against the building's worn bricks. A sneer tugs at the leader's lip as he sizes up the homeless man. In his mind, he sees someone defenseless, someone who might offer a moment's amusement or an easy mark to torment. Soon, all of them turn their attention to Alex, eyes gleaming with the promise of trouble. They pick up their pace, moving with a choreographed shuffle that cuts through the indifferent crowd, aiming straight for the man who has already endured far more than they can imagine. A shrill burst of laughter punctures the relative calm of the street, causing Alex to look up. The four young men have honed in on him, closing the distance with a kind of pack mentality that sets them apart from the hurried office workers and bystanders. Their leader, wearing a faded hoodie and a self-assured grin, gestures in Alex's direction with a plastic bag crinkling at his side. Without waiting for a greeting, the group fans out in front of him, effectively cutting him off from the rest of the sidewalk. They begin with mock politeness, asking Alex if he's got a smoke or a spare dollar. Their voices carry a sarcastic tone, and the questions come in rapid succession, barely giving him time to respond. One of them nudges his foot against the edge of Alex's cardboard sign, sneering at the handwritten plea for help. Initially, Alex tries to keep his gaze low and his response is curt, sensing their disrespect but hoping they'll lose interest. Yet with each scoff and each smug exchange of glances, it becomes clear they haven't approached him for a conversation or even a handout. They want a reaction, some sign of fear or annoyance that might spice up their night. And the more Alex refuses to give it to them, the more their crude taunts escalate. The tallest of the group, clearly emboldened by Alex's refusal to meet his gaze, steps in closer. He aims the toe of his sneaker at the edge of Alex's warm blanket and kicks it aside, scattering a few of Alex's meager possessions. A tattered paperback slides across the sidewalk, its pages fluttering wildly for a moment before settling near a gutter. Another thug, shorter but with a wiry energy, snatches up Alex's cardboard sign, skimming the faded letters before crumpling it in his fist. He tosses the ruined sign behind him with a sneer, as if it were trash he had every right to discard. Alex tightens his jaw and slowly stands, sliding one foot behind him in a stance that reflects both caution and readiness. At first glance, it may appear like he's simply trying to create personal space, but for those who've seen real combat, the movement suggests a controlled posture. The group circles him, their laughter sharp and unkind, carrying the sting of mockery in every syllable. One of them reaches for Alex's jacket, perhaps to yank him closer, or maybe to rummage his pockets, but Alex steps back quickly, escaping the grab with a swift, practiced motion. This minor show of defense sparks a new wave of catcalls. They're amused and taunting, as though they've stumbled onto a game far more interesting than the idle bullying they started with. The leader's eyes glint with the thrill of confrontation. He spits a racial slur, the word landing like a slap in the cold night air. Around them, a handful of pedestrians pause in uneasy curiosity, sensing trouble but unsure whether to intervene. Alex's gaze flickers from the menacing circle of faces to the small gathering of onlookers. He knows how quickly things can turn violent and how few are likely to step in once fists begin to fly. One of the men, emboldened by the circle of jeering faces, takes a sudden lunge toward Alex, perhaps hoping to rattle him with brute force. But Alex moves on instinct born of training. A quick sidestep, a controlled pivot, and he neatly flicks the thug's arm, guiding the momentum away. The thug staggers forward, looking stunned. Surprise ripples through the group, their sneering confidence giving way to an uneasy laughter. Alex eases back into his stance, eyes flickering to the onlookers whose concerned whispers now carry across the sidewalk. It's a tiny show of skill, subtle yet precise, that hints there's more to this homeless guy than meets the eye. The men exchange glances, the brief silence magnifying their uncertainty. A couple of them recover quickly, snickering as if it were all just a lucky break on Alex's part, but the leader's gaze narrows. He seems torn between upping the aggression and reassessing whether this target is worth the trouble. A twinge of wariness appears in his posture, as though some primal instinct warns him to back off, yet pride and the expectation of his friends push him forward. Tension stifles the air. In that moment, Alex tenses too, that old muscle memory returning like a wave. A single glance at his dog tags, partially exposed by his shifting collar, might reveal the truth of his background to anyone observant enough. But for these men, locked in their own bravado, it's just a glint of metal. They have no idea who they've tried to corner or the storm they risk unleashing if they press further. A hushed commotion ripples through the small crowd of onlookers just as another bystander steps forward. A middle-aged man in a weather jacket, whose keen gaze has been fixed on Alex, calls out in a voice tinged with surprise and recognition. "Hey, hold on. That's Harris, right? Weren't you in the 82nd? His words pierce the stagnant air, and the ring of aggressors hesitates. Even the bystanders stir at the mention of a specific military unit. For a second, the pack of young men, wrapped up in their own boldness, falters. They glance at one another, clearly unsure what to make of this new information. Alex lowers his chin, reluctant to draw more attention to the dog tags that have already hinted at a storied past. The man who spoke up inches closer, though he keeps a safe distance, eyes flicking warily between Alex and the group. "I serve too," he says, tone softer now, a note of camaraderie reaching across the zuck of circumstance. "You were a damn good soldier." A few onlookers crane their necks for a better look, curiosity mingling with concern. For Alex, there is no joy in being recognized this way. His posture grows fractionally stiffer, and a pang of discomfort tightens his expression. But there's no unringing the bell. The notion that the ragged man standing before them might be a decorated war hero, a man who's endured real battlefields, sparks a tremor of doubt among the thugs. Their cocky smirks dim, as if they've just realized they backed themselves into a fight with someone they grossly underestimated. A flicker of panic touches the leader's eyes, though he tries to hide it behind a scoff. "So what if he's some soldier?" he mutters, voice taking on a defensive edge. One of his buddies, possibly unnerved by the mention of real combat experience, shuffles a step back, unsure whether his role as a tormentor still feels safe. Their tight circle loosens as they glance at each other, each man silently trying to gauge just how serious this could get. The night air, once echoing with their jeering laughter, settles into an uneasy lull that crackles with underlying tension. The bystanders' remark about Alex's service lingers in the air, adding a sense of gravity the men hadn't accounted for. Pride and stubbornness, however, are powerful motivators. The leader doubles down, swearing under his breath and squaring his shoulders. Unwilling to concede in front of his friends, he spits out another insult, this time laced with racial contempt to reassert his dominance, and a few of his friends rally behind him with half-hearted snickers. Yet the confidence in their voices is wavering, undercut by the knowledge they have inadvertently poked at something far more formidable than they bargained for. Alex keeps his hands at his sides, palms loose but ready, a chill running through him that has nothing to do with the temperature. He recognizes the look in their eyes, part bravado, part fear, the animal response of a group that feels cornered and won't back down without a show of force. In that instant, the city seems to hold its breath. The group's leader clenches a fist, his posture screaming one last, desperate attempt at intimidation. Unaware of the full extent of Alex's training, they sense only that he is no easy target. But the question remains whether they'll heed that warning or charge straight into a lesson in humility. In a final moment of bravado, the leader cocks his arm and lunges at Alex with a wild swing, driven more by desperation than technique. Alex's military instincts take over. He shifts his weight and pivots, letting the punch skim harmlessly past before delivering a swift counter-strike to the attacker's torso firm enough to stun. But controlled to avoid lasting damage, the man staggers back, a look of pure shock flooding his features. In the small cluster of onlookers, someone gasps. Another quickly raises a phone to record, sensing this altercation isn't just random street scuffling. No longer content to taunt from the sidelines, two of the other men converge on Alex simultaneously. One tries to grab him from behind while the other aims a cheap shot at his ribs. Alex drops his shoulder to free himself of the rear grip, then twists fluidly, knocking the second man's arm aside. His movements are almost effortless strikes and blocks honed by countless drills and real-life combat missions. Each blow is exact, more about neutralizing a threat than inflicting harm. The thug who had pinned him from behind tumbles forward, crashing into his partner, their bravado collapsing in a heap of curses and panic. Onlookers begin to murmur, some stepping forward as if to help, but Alex remains in control. The tall leader tries one more rush, charging in with a growl that masks his rising fear. Alex sidesteps again, hooking an arm beneath the man's elbow and using his own momentum against him. A sharp twist sends the leader sprawling to the concrete. For several heartbeats, all that can be heard is ragged breathing and the scuff of shoes on pavement. The remaining young man, who until now had been stoking his friend's aggression with mocking jibes, takes one uncertain glance at his fallen crew and backs away, hands raised, muttering excuses as he fades into the crowd. The entire confrontation has lasted mere moments, yet it has shifted the atmosphere of the street. Passers-by no longer merely watch from a distance. A few step in, ready to call for help or shield Alex if the thugs rally themselves again. But the gang's resolve is broken. The leader scrambles onto his knees, his gaze darting between Alex and the gathering witnesses, and then he staggers to his feet. He mumbles a crude threat, something about payback, something about Alex's type not belonging here, but it has lost its sting. They retreat, limping and dragging each other along, casting backward glances laced with confusion, at the man who wasn't supposed to be capable of such skill. Alex stands in the middle of the sidewalk, shoulders heaving from exertion, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Though victorious in the scuffle, he feels a weight of sorrow settle over him. Violence, even in self-defense, triggers old memories of battlefields and desperate fights for survival he had hoped never to revisit. An onlooker rushes up, offering a jacket that's fallen or a bag that's been knocked aside. Another voice, distant in the noise, calls out praise. Way to go, man. You showed those punks. Yet Alex just exhales, scanning the scattered belongings around him. He quietly gathers his frayed blanket, his battered duffel, and the battered pride he must carry from one day to the next, wishing that the world allowed for less conflict both here on a dark city street and beyond. The adrenaline ebbs, leaving Alex standing amid a circle of onlookers whose expressions range from awe to concern, a handful of people moving closer hesitantly at first to check if he's injured or needs help. One woman bends to pick up his paperback from the gutter, smoothing out the damp pages before offering it back to him with a half-apologetic smile. You all right? She asks gently, and Alex nods, too drained to summon much more than a curt thanks. The tension that just crackled through the street evaporates, replaced by low murmurs of curiosity and relief. A couple of individuals snap photos or short videos on their phones, but the general mood is less about spectacle now and more about reckoning with what they just witnessed. Not only had this homeless man defended himself with discipline and skill, he had done so while showing remarkable restraint, never crossing the line into unnecessary cruelty. As the crowd begins to disperse, Alex collects his things with calm efficiency. The physical toll of the scuffle is minor, but his psychic weight sits heavily on him. Old battlefields flash momentarily in his mind's eye, heat, dust, the unyielding urgency of staying alive. The memory stings all the sharper because it's now colliding with the reality of standing nameless in a city that barely acknowledges him. More than one passerby is tempted to say something along the lines of "thank you for your service," yet something in Alex's demeanor keeps them from intruding on his introspection. Even as strangers recognize his heroism, he cannot escape the lingering sorrow that comes with his circumstances. He stands on a street where the horizon holds no promise of a warm bed tonight, silently wrestling with a mixture of pride in his prowess that violence had to surface at all. Moments later, a pair of uniformed police officers emerge from their cruiser, having been called by worried passersby during the altercation. They approach with caution, eyes scanning the remnants of the disturbance, discarded wrappers, a few scattered bystanders in hushed conversation, and Alex still clutching his torn blanket and duffel. One officer, seeing the wariness in Alex's posture, lifts a hand in a reassuring gesture. "We got a report about some trouble here," she says gently, her tone indicating she already knows he isn't the one who started it. A couple of onlookers step forward to explain what happened, recounting how Alex was harassed and forced to defend himself. Though wary of any further conflict, Alex answers the officers' questions calmly, describing how the group of young men confronted him. The officers exchange looks. This is not the first time they've heard of roaming bullies picking targets based on vulnerability or prejudice. "We'll put out a bolo on those guys," the male officer says, scribbling notes. "But can we do anything for you? Get you to a shelter or call someone?" There's a beat of silence in which Alex wrestles with pride and weariness. He finally shrugs, indicating that he's accustomed to fending for himself. Still, the female officer presses a small card into his hand, an address for a veteran outreach program. Her eyes flick to the dog tag. She knows. It's not much she offers quietly, but they can help. Alex hesitates before pocketing the card. The reality of his situation tightens around him. No home to return to, only the uncertain promise of a cot or a meal if he's lucky. Yet tonight, something shifts in the crowd's perception. A nearby woman, perhaps the same one who returned his paperback, hands him a fresh cup of coffee without a word, just a nod of respect. Another passerby mutters, "Glad you're on our side," and that draws a faint, almost shy smile from Alex. He thanks them softly, taking the gesture as a small but meaningful spark of hope in a life often overshadowed by hardship. As the police head back to their cruiser, Alex straightens, exhaling into the cool night air. Around him, the city's noise surges on, horns blaring in distant traffic, pedestrians bustling past, oblivious to the drama that just played out here. But for those who witnessed it, the moment lingers, a reminder that nobody is truly as they appear, and that behind tired eyes and worn-out clothes can lie the spirit of someone who once stood on the front lines, ready to protect. Clutching the outreach card, Alex moves off into the swirling neon and half-lit corners of the block, hopeful that tomorrow might dawn with the faint possibility of a second chance. Under the glow of a tired street lamp, the city's pulse continues its relentless beat, indifferent to the fact that one man's life has just shifted in a quiet but meaningful way. Alex slips the card for the veteran outreach into his pocket, his hand lingering over it with an uncertain hope. His breath fogs the air as he heads down the sidewalk, passing clusters of evening revelers who are mercifully unaware of the fight he just endured. For the first time in a while, he feels something beyond the dull acceptance of his day-to-day struggle. The officer's compassion, the small kindness of a hot coffee, even the bystander's belated gratitude, all of it converges into a gentle reminder that he is more than his present circumstances. He pauses at a corner where a flickering neon sign hums overhead. Behind him, the crowd that gathered has begun to disperse, returning to routine concerns, dinner plans, bus schedules, scrolling phone messages. Yet a few remain, exchanging quiet words about what they witnessed a homeless man who turned out to be anything but powerless. Their hushed comments ripple through Alex's thoughts. He recalls the nights spent under makeshift shelters and war zones, how camaraderie and a shared cause forged a sense of belonging he never quite replicated back home. Tonight he glimpsed that fellowship again, in the unexpected voices that stood up for him, or in the tentative kindness extended after the altercation. Cradling his duffel under one arm, Alex looks up at the sky. It's full dark now, yet something about it feels less heavy than before. There's a silent promise carried on the evening breeze, a stirring sense that maybe, with a little help, his future need not be an unchanging loop of survival. As he continues on, his footsteps softer than the city's clamor, he lets the thought settle. Tomorrow, he might call that veteran outreach. He might find a way to move beyond street corners and shadows. And if he can't, at least he knows he is not invisible to everyone, that a spark of respect and recognition still exists for a man who fought on behalf of others, even when he must now fight each day for himself. With that decision hovering in his mind, he disappears into the deeper recesses of the urban night, unseen but not entirely forgotten by those who caught a glimpse of his quiet resolve. Their stories, shared over late dinners or in social media posts, will speak of a man once dismissed as hopeless who revealed, in a single moment of conflict, the rich tapestry of a soldier's past. And in that shared retelling lies the story's final truth. Behind every worn face and rag jacket is a life that mattered once and still does, if only someone cares to look. Late that same night, in a cramped apartment across town, a local reporter scrolls through social media posts and phone videos documenting the confrontation. The footage shows Alex deftly disarming the thugs, then standing steady amidst the jarring hush that follows. The reporter, intrigued by the incongruity of a man who appears homeless displaying military-level self-defense, begins taking notes. Her eyes dart across the screen, capturing moments of empathy from bystanders' simple gestures that contrast sharply with the brutality of the attack. She's seen countless stories of violence in the city, but this one hums with a different energy, the subtle heroism of a man who, despite life's farthest blows, retains both skill and restraint. By morning, whispers of the encounter have spread through various community threads and local news blurbs. Some question how a war hero ended up on the streets, others commend the passersby who supported him, in coffee shops and break rooms. People rewatched the snippets of video, stunned by how seamlessly Alex defended himself in a situation most would have fled. Quiet debates spark. Should veterans be provided better care? How often do onlookers dismiss those in need without recognizing their stories? Through it all, Alex's name becomes more than a random reference. In a passing conversation, it symbolizes resilience and the possibility of redemption. For Alex, none of this is known yet. He rests that night in a modest shelter he visited on the police officer's recommendation, warming his hands around a cup of donated tea. The dog tags still hang against his chest, their faint rattle a steady reminder of another chapter of life he rarely speaks about. Yet this evening feels different. He's traded a lonely curb for a shared bunk, and for the first time in months, he senses a new path forming. The outreach program's pamphlet sits folded beside him, a tangible option for turning the uncertain spark of maybe tomorrow into a real plan. Beneath the fluorescent lights of the shelter, he exhales, letting the day's tension drain away, anchoring himself in the knowledge that he is, after all, still fighting, but now he's no longer doing it alone. Morning light filters through the high windows of the shelter, illuminating the rows of narrow bunk beds and a handful of men who rise before sunrise to start their uncertain days. Alex sits on the edge of his cot, eyes drifting across the folded pamphlet in his hand. Overnight, the scuffle on the street has evolved into local buzz, with a swirl of sympathy, curiosity, and speculation attached to his name. But Alex, unaware of the chatter, is more concerned with the immediate realities: finding stable work, establishing a routine, and securing the footing to rebuild a life that once carried such promise. One of the shelter volunteers, a young college student in a brightly colored hoodie, passes by with a clipboard. She notices the pamphlet, smiles kindly at Alex, and asks if he wants to learn more about their veteran assistance program. He hesitates, the dog tags under his shirt still an unspoken reminder of days he can't quite decide whether he wants to remember or leave behind. Slowly he nods. Her warmth and sincerity, free of judgment, coax him into accepting at least a conversation. Later that afternoon, he finds himself sitting across from a program counselor at a battered desk cluttered with folders marked housing, employment, trauma support. Though the counselor's questions feel invasive at first: when did you serve? Where have you been staying? Do you have any family nearby? Alex works through them methodically, choosing honesty when it would be easier to deflect. In the counselor's gentle but direct manner, he senses not just a duty to help a veteran, but a genuine desire to see a human being given a fair chance. By the end of their talk, a small plan has formed: a temporary job opening, a lead on more consistent lodging, and the prospect of therapy for the sleepless nights and the weighty memories. As Alex steps back onto the street, the evening sun paints the buildings in a lighter hue than the night before, hinting at an optimism he's rarely let himself feel. He presses the program counselor's business card between his fingers, turning it over thoughtfully. The city still roars around him, cars honk, vendors shout, throngs of people hurry past, but it doesn't feel quite as cold. The memory of the attack remains, the sheer nerve of those men, the jolt of adrenaline, the unraveling aftermath. Yet the recollection no longer carries a sting of defeat. It stands as a pivot point, a moment that forced him back into view when he'd grown used to the anonymity of being overlooked. An older woman, perhaps recognizing him from the shelter or from one of the recorded videos, catches his eye and gives a curt nod, as if to say, "I've seen you. I know who you are." He returns it, a silent acknowledgement that, yes, he's still here, still a soldier in his own right, navigating a different kind of battlefield. With the sun dipping low once more, he heads down the sidewalk, duffel bag over his shoulder, senses alert not for conflict this time, but for the small opportunities that might finally lead him home. Behind him, a conversation fades about that veteran who took down those thugs, but Alex doesn't slow. Whether these strangers see him as a hero or simply a man clinging to the last threads of his dignity he can't control. What matters now is that he's begun the slow, steady climb out of the shadows. And for a brief, hopeful moment, as dusk settles on the city again, he allows himself to believe that tomorrow may not just be another fight for survival, but a step closer to the life he once fought so hard to protect. A few days later, Alex stands outside a modest 2-story brick building with a small sign reading Veterans Resource Center. The late afternoon sun warms his shoulders as he steps inside, greeted by a hushed hum of activity counselors speaking in low voices, phones ringing, and the soft click of a keyboard behind a reception desk. There's no fanfare for him here, no lingering stares about the viral videos or the rumors of what went down on that dimly lit street. Instead, a steady sense of purpose flows through the place. The quiet determination of staff and volunteers who've seen too many wounded souls left on the margins. He's here to follow up on that tentative plan, a lead on maintenance work at a nearby facility, plus paperwork for transitional housing. When a soft-spoken social worker invites him to sit in her office, Alex notices the way her eyes take in everything: his weathered jacket, the angles of his face, the dog tags half hidden beneath his shirt. She discusses the job requirements matter-of-factly, no pity in her tone, then hands him a stack of forms to fill out. There's a gently urgent cadence to her voice, like someone balancing empathy with the pressing reality that resources can vanish if you wait too long. Finishing his paperwork, Alex wanders through a hallway decorated with framed photos, smiling groups of veterans at volunteer events, snapshots of tidy, newly renovated apartments, even candid shots of people hugging staff members in gratitude. In each image, he can sense a story of resilience and slow, steady rebuilding. Beyond these doors, the city's bustle continues uninterrupted, but in here, each meeting, each handshake, feels like another step out of a deep ravine. It strikes him that, for the first time in ages, he isn't bracing for the worst. He's leaning cautiously toward the possibility that life may grant him the second chance so many have told him he deserves. On the way out, Alex notices a small corkboard covered in pinned notes, thank you messages from other veterans who once stood where he stands now. Some read like short testimonies, you helped me find my feet again, or I'm no longer alone. Others are simply phone numbers, scribbled in pen, an invitation to keep in touch. Something about this wall of collective struggle and collective hope grounds him more than any single conversation has. He fishes out a scrap of paper from his own coat pocket. It's just an old shopping list on the back of a receipt. But after a beat of hesitation, he jots down his first name and a phone number he got from the shelter, with a pushpin provided by a staff member who notices what he's doing. He tacks his note onto the board. Alex, thank you for reminding I'm still worth something. Outside, the streetlights are winking on against the dusky sky, and traffic is inching along the boulevard. The resource center's door closes behind Alex with a gentle clang. It's not a dramatic exit, just another small, pivotal moment in a life marked by survival. He grips his duffel a bit tighter and steps forward. In the distance, someone waiting at a bus stop scrolls through a local news article on their phone, a piece about a homeless veteran who defended himself against a gang of thugs. Maybe they'll connect the dots if they glance up at Alex, maybe not. Either way, he keeps moving. There's a sense of direction in his stride, born from knowing he's not solely defined by one dark moment, or even by his past service, but by the efforts he's making right now to reclaim a future. And even if that future remains uncertain, he carries in his pocket the counselor's schedule, a spark of faith from the resource center staff, and most importantly, his own conviction that he is more than the sum of his hardships.